Contrails in the sky. Today, a common sight that doesn't attract any attention. In 1954, however, people were not used to seeing these white stripes. So when they did see them, they were concerned. The problem was that nobody could explain which planes were creating the stripes. Back in the 50s, white coats and uniforms held great authority. When high-ranking officers were asked if these stripes were friend or foe, they wouldn't say. People became weary. The idea of the atomic age was just sinking in.
In this second episode, we move forward to 1954. The Norwegian Air Force is training hard with their newly acquired Thunderjets. But capabilities are not great and radar coverage is still a new idea. The story we're about to go into is actually not about Norway at all, but it has Norwegian interests and Norwegian concerns all over it.
"7:30 a.m., May 8th, 1954. 3 RB-47E from the US Strategic Air Command get their fuel tanks filled to the max. They have taken off from Fairford Air Base in the UK. Now, over the North Sea, they find their formation and start climbing to altitude. Well out of sight in international airspace, they cruise north along the Norwegian coast. In the lead plane is Commander-Pilot Harold Austin, co-pilot Carl Holt, and navigator Vance Hevelin. Their mission is cosmic top secret and requested by none other than General Curtis LeMay himself. At the premeditated point, the two planes reverse course. To the other crew's astonishment, Austin's plane continues on. Then it sets course south. The weather forecast they received indicated a bright sky and atmospheric conditions that would not create any contrails behind the jet. In the early 50s, the Soviet Union was developing several new radar systems. The radars were mounted on trucks that could be deployed to new places and powered up at short notice. But they rotated slowly, and the screen image could be cluttered. According to the intelligence gathered, no Soviet radar would detect them until they were well within 250 kilometers range. A plane flying at 40,000 feet would probably not be detected at all. And if they were, the Soviet MiG-15s would not be able to attack the RB-47 due to its superior speed and altitude. The RB-47E is loaded with cameras of all types and hundreds of feet of large format film. When they all run in sequence, nothing below will escape scrutiny. The crew sets it all to operate. At 12 midday, they cross the coast. Right next to the border of Norway lies the Luotstari Air Base. Here, the MiG-15s are parked in rows. Hevelin has the course meticulously plotted out. He gives Austin precise course changes so that they will enter each target base at exactly the right angle. Further east lies the Murmansk Fjord area, which is packed with military facilities. Of special interest are two air bases not far from Murmansk, where they might get updates on the new Bison bomber and the not yet operational MiG-17. So far, the mission goes unhindered. Then Holt notices contrails forming. Whether or not the Soviet radars had detected them, their trespassing into forbidden territory is now very obvious. The fighters on the ground will have wasted no time. As they clear the Murmansk area, heading south for Monchegorsk, Holt follows the fighters as small dots coming climbing up towards them. But this is 40,000 feet. The air is so thin, the engines can hardly breathe, and the wings can hardly generate lift. The RB-47E is lighter than its bomber cousins, and the 6 engines and large wings give it an edge over the fighters. The MiGs that reach up to it stay half a mile out to the side to make a positive identification. But being so close to stalling, any violent maneuvering from their part or firing of guns will cause them to fall out of the sky. Like predator and prey, they stare at one another from a distance. They continue over the desolate terrain of the Kola Peninsula and out over the White Sea. North of Arkhangelsk, they make a gentle turn west, lining up to reach 3 air bases by the city. Having crossed the White Sea, the MiG-15s give up and descend. But new fighters arrive on the scene, some with obviously foul intentions. Austin sees tracers flying by both above and below the RB-47. These are obviously not MiG-15s, but MiG-17s. They have indeed become operational. But the only smart thing Austin can do is to stay focused on the mission. Holt frantically swivels his seat 180 degrees, aware that he cannot eject at this position. He ducks his head down into the radar scope to control the tail gun, but today the radar scope will not turn on. Holt tries all he can, but the scope remains black. He can still turn and fire the guns, but he has no way of seeing his attackers. Not that they need to know that. Holt makes an approximate aim and fires several bursts. There are no tracers in the RB-47, but the cannon bursts are visible nonetheless. The RB-47's tail gun creates a 90-degree cone behind the aircraft, very lethal to any attacker. That's all they need to know. One of the MiG-17s gathers speed and throws itself upwards. From the side, it tries to ram them, but the maneuvering causes it to stall and pass just beneath the RB-47, being picked up by the cameras as they go. The fighters stay out of the rear gun kill zone, but they keep firing. The MiG's 37mm cannon has explosive projectiles. One hit at a critical point could be fatal to the RB-47. The RB-47 may appear like a barn door to the attackers, and yet still they find it difficult to get a precise shot at this extreme altitude. But it becomes obvious that the large jet does not fly evasive maneuvers. It sticks to its planned route. By gathering energy lower down and predicting a favourable position further ahead, there just may be an opportunity opening up. Then, suddenly, the last airbase is done. The plans they had been briefed about only a few hours ago have been executed to the finest detail. The intense focus on the mission had made Austin ignore the haunting tracer bullets, and for every pound of fuel they burn, the RB-47 climbs a little higher. The fighters coming up at them, laden with fuel and ammo, simply cannot reach them. And then they notice something isn't right. The cameras have been running and the plane responds as normal, but something is wrong with the radios. Calls are still coming through on their general radio channel, but there's no response on the intercom. Austin tries to switch channels, but nothing happens, and the intercom remains dead. Holt loosens from his seat and crawls down the aisle. He now has to be the messenger boy between navigator and commander. They cross out of Soviet airspace into Finland, but the MiGs don't seem to care. Still they fire, but the accuracy is inadequate. And then the firing stops. Austin looks around, but there is only the bright sky and the land of the 1,000 lakes below. Evelyn plots a new course. Holt brings the new settings back to the commander, shouting through the jet noise. It is now all about making it back home. And then, out of ammunition, light on fuel, the last MiG-17 has climbed up in tight formation with the RB-47. As a last show of force, the fighter keeps them company for 3 minutes. And then they are alone. Their super secret, super risky mission has been accomplished. Austin will credit it to the rigorous training at the Strategic Air Command. They didn't bow under pressure. They assess the damage. The radio does not switch channels, they have spent more fuel than normal, and they are 30 minutes behind schedule. Just as Austin does his calculations, they hear the tanker on station over the North Sea calling that it is leaving the pattern, returning to base. Holt tries to call him up to make him stay, but there is no response. As they approach Swedish airspace, Austin climbs to 43,000 feet and throttles back to the optimum cruising speed. He now has some serious decision-making to do. Ahead of him, at the southwestern tip of Norway, lies the Sola Air Base. This is where the Norwegians train hard with their newly acquired Thunderjets, provided by the US military aid program. 35 US personnel are stationed there, trained and equipped to service B-47 bombers on return from a mission. But they will not be expecting him now. There have been several articles in European media the previous few weeks about mysterious overflights. The authorities keep the stories down so as not to show their inabilities and to avoid stirring up an already anxious public. Austin knows his plane is hit, but not how badly nor how obviously. A story about a battle-damaged RB-47 landing at Sola may easily leak out and cause serious political implications. There is a trade-off between bringing home the exposed film and keeping the secrecy about the mission having ever taken place. If Austin can bring them to one of the SAC bases, he will have accomplished both. Austin stays at altitude. No other plane, eastern or western, can reach them now. There will be a gambling window amid the North Sea. At a point, he will no longer be able to turn back to Sola, and only further ahead will he reach a possible glide path to one of the airports in the UK. As the Sola Air Base disappears under the plane's nose, Austin decides to make the gamble. All he can do is to repeat the calls on the radio for tanker assistance. In the back seat, Holt has made the same calculations. He stares at the fuel gauges. Wiggling needles, one after the other, have come to rest. He is far from happy about the situation, but with no intercom, he can't make his opinion heard. At Mildenhall Air Base in the UK, Jim Wrigley and his crew are on strip alert in their KC-97. They belong to a tight-knit group of colleagues in the Strategic Air Command. He picks up Austin's radio call. The words are blurred, but Wrigley recognises Austin's voice. He taxis out and calls for permission to take off, but the tower has a situation with another plane and takeoff is denied. Wrigley asks how far out the other plane is. 5 minutes, the tower replies. Wrigley calls that he is taking off. To the traffic controller's anger and astonishment, the heavy tanker taxis onto the runway and runs the takeoff procedure. Then he gives full power. Painfully slow, the heavy tanker gathers speed. It roars the runway from east to west before rotating and taking to the sky. On return, the base commander will threaten Wrigley with a court-martial and British Air Traffic Control will give him a violation, both situations which are later discreetly fixed by General LeMay. The tanker heads out over the ocean. Jim Wrigley scans the sky above, looking for Austin's jet. A contrail from the northeast leaves him in little doubt. He turns the tanker and settles at 3,000 feet on a southern heading. Austin spots the shiny dot below. He throttles back and initiates the descent. The aft main gear and the 2 support wheels on the inward engine pods are lowered as air brakes. Keeps the tanker in sight as he circles down to make contact. Never has he been so thrilled to see another airplane. Holt stares at the fuel gauges, insisting afterwards that they all read empty when the boom made contact. When the gauges read 12,000 pounds of fuel, Holt gives a sign and Austin releases from the tanker. Austin can again throttle up and set course for Fairford Air Base. Unable to contact the tower for clearance, they look thoroughly for other planes and make a low pass to show their intentions. Minutes later, they are back at Fairford Air Base where they had started. An uneventful landing on a busy airbase.
Hal Austin passed away in 2018, aged 93. Luckily, with the openness that was in the 1990s, the British historian Paul Lashmars learned about the flight and he tracked down all 3 crew members in his work with this book. The 3 crew members had gone their separate ways and they hadn't spoken to anyone about this mission.
The mechanics at the base had asked no questions. They simply repaired the damages. One piece of fuselage plating was cut to size and placed in a frame for Austin to keep as a souvenir. The situation with the overflights clearly showed that the fighters of the day did not have any advantage over the bombers. The articles in the press in the spring of 1954 mention overflight sightings on several specific locations in Scandinavia. None of the air forces could confirm any facts about them. In one article, the top brass of the Air Force were made to answer what the Norwegian capacities were. They had to admit the Thunderjet was not fast enough to be an interceptor. But still, Norway was fortunate that the US continued the military aid program, And they already had the F-86D, the Sabre Dog. The Sabre Dog integrated the radar into an agile fighter with one pilot in the cockpit. It had no guns, instead boasting 24 unguided rockets. The F-86D was continued into an export version called the F-86K. The K model was introduced to southern Norway in 1955. As radars in the north improved, it came to Border in 1960 and was phased in at the 334 Squadron. For the Norwegian Air Force, the type was a handful. The radar and firing guidance system increased the workload to the limit of what one man could handle. It had the most advanced electronics of its time. It took highly educated and experienced technicians to maintain the systems. Often, it proved too much for the Norwegian personnel. Minor malfunctions in the engine could cause it to catch fire. The ejection seat still needed altitude and speed to sequence properly. But when all was up and running, this fighter was the one for the job. It could take off into the night or into dense clouds. Receiving guidance from ground radar, it could acquire its target from within a range of 6 nautical miles. The D model, operated by the Americans, could attack a bomber head-on. Each rocket held the force of a 75mm round. The F-86K did not have this. Instead, the pilot would maneuver in behind the bomber. The K model had 4 20mm guns and the new heat-seeking Sidewinder missiles. The attack could be accomplished without ever having seen the enemy. The F-86K had the capacity to go supersonic, but only nose down with a height advantage. In an intercept situation, being scrambled from the ground, this was a privilege you didn't have. The GI-UK gap was a stretch of sea narrow enough to be fiercely monitored by both sides. All Soviet traffic, below the surface, on the surface and in the air, had to go through here to reach the North Atlantic. As capacities increased, Soviet surveillance planes would fly patterns in the area to observe movements and to track electronic signals. Further north, all this traffic had to round the corner, which was Norway. As the 50s came to an end, the NATO membership had resulted in a considerable surveillance and intelligence gathering capacity. Radars were scanning the skies, listening stations were monitoring radio communications. At the Kola Peninsula, the airspace was shared by naval aviation, swarms of tactical fighters, long-range bombers and surveillance resources. A growing pattern of air operations was taking shape. Some movements were most likely large jet aircraft. The F-86K lacked the range and speed to reach them. Only towards the end of the fighter's service life were 3 successful intercepts made by fighters deployed to Barnuk.
Now, this here is a typical household book from the 50s, and in it there are articles from around the world. One point they are certain not to miss are the American H-bomb experiments at the Bikini Atoll.
The United States is, of course, the most modern place on the planet. But compared to war-torn Western Europe, the Soviet Union is not lagging behind in any obvious way. Quite the contrary. Some of the accomplishments made there are impressive. In the Soviet article, there are 2 concept drawings of jet bombers, seemingly based on reliable intelligence sources. What would be seen in the sky in the years to come would be the Tupolev Tu-16, known in the West as the Badger bomber. To keep an eye on these, the F-86K would need a successor.
It would still take some years before the Badgers took to the sky in any numbers. For now, the F-86K would patrol the skies unopposed.